we shall come now to the last installment of our talks on Gnosis in art and literature, in which we have reviewed, albeit briefly and maybe in a somewhat sketchy fashion, some of the greatest literary figures and their contribution in the 20th century, and also dealt with the overall subjects of literature, poetry, and drama. And so as the concluding one of the series, we have chosen the topic of three great women writers of the 20th century, and of course, let's say the judgment concerning their greatness as contrasted perhaps with the greatness of some others, that is clearly mine. But if you look at some of their work and get a little idea of what they really stood for, I think you will agree with me that these were indeed very outstanding writers. And that will be the last one of our literary series. You know, in Austria we have a saying, alles hat ein Ende, nur die Wurst hat zwei. Everything has an end, only the sausage has two. Which is an undeniable fact, you know. And it's a Viennese saying where, let's say, culinary metaphors have always been held in very high regard. And so therefore this is the end of this particular series, and I hope that it has been somewhat informative for us. Now I intend to review this evening the contribution and to some extent perhaps the personality of three women in literature, and I will begin with one with whom perhaps here in the Los Angeles area we have a little more direct connection, because this is where she lived the last few years of her life, and this is where she went to the other side. And that, of course, was Anais. So she was really our fellow Angelina for some time. She died at the age of 74 in 1977 in Los Angeles, in her house in the Silver Lake district. And then we will also look at Simone Weil, who died at the tender age of 34, much earlier in 1943, and Marguerite Yourcenar, who outlived all of them. I can't think at the moment of when she passed away, because, believe it or not, when I first put some of these notes together for a lecture series many years ago, she was still alive, which of course by now she would not be. Of the three, none have either aspired or attained to great and general public fame. Although Anais attained to a measure of popularity fairly late in life, after the publication of her diaries in the 1960s, and I must humbly admit that those were really the first writings by Anais that I encountered, and then from there I looked at some of her earlier works. Of the three, none have aspired to a great and general public fame, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. Marguerite Yourcenar, the French writer, became the first woman ever to be elected to the French Academy, which is in France among intellectuals an incredibly big honor, you know. I think the only American who was ever admitted in an honorary capacity, I may be incorrect, but certainly one, and the first was Benjamin Franklin. But, you know, so the l'Académie Française is an incredibly big, prestigious establishment. This elevates a person to the status of the immortals. So if you are aspiring to immortality, forget about alchemy, forget about medicine, try to become a member of the Académie Française, and then you will be an immortal. Now, in spite of their differences in age and nationality and other aspects of background, all three possess a mysterious common denominator, which maybe to an extent and degree we have already encountered in the writers of the male gender. You know, at that time, early in the 20th century, there were still genders. You know, what we have now, I don't know, and I increasingly don't care. But let's say at that time that was certainly the case. But they had a common denominator, which was an orientation toward the vital task of what, from our Gnostic, theosophical, esoteric point of view and verbiage, we might call spiritual transformation within a highly personal and heterodox context. Anais Nin fiercely resisted all specific labels of spiritual traditions, but was deeply involved most of her life in concern for depth psychology, primarily as an associate of Otto Rank, one of Freud's most creative disciples, second in his unique divergence from Freud only to C.G. Jung. So you can sort of tell the really creative disciples are the ones who add something to the material and who move away from the original teacher. In fact, I had a teacher who shall remain nameless, who said to us at a certain point, and really scared the daylights out of us, not only at that time, but other times too. He said, you know, you all will have to kill me. And I said, what the hell are you talking about? You know, so by which was a metaphor that those who really profit by the teacher's teaching go then on their own. They take what they receive, but then they become, so to say, their own leader and their own teacher. And that certainly was the case with Anais Nin and Otto Rank also. Rank, interestingly enough, and maybe that is, I think Rank was the only Freudian that I remember, and you know, my geriatric memory has to be strained a little bit. He was the only one of the prominent disciples of Sigmund Freud who had an interest in Gnosticism. And consequently, I had an interest in him. Although, you know, I had a great interest in Freud also at one time, largely because I earned my living for a couple of years by digesting and much of Freud's work for a particular project. But let us say Anais, now when we come to, I'm just jumping around now a little, when we come to Simone Weil, who was born into a non-religious Jewish family of German origin but living in France, she became what cannot be otherwise defined but a Christian Gnostic. And I will have to summarize some of the material that I found in her writings, but I would say in any modern source there is no writer more Gnostic and with a greater understanding of, let's say, the esoteric kernel of Christianity than Simone Weil. And Marguerite Yourcenar, who in a secretive and mysteriously typical French way interpreted the Alexandrian Gnosis through the eyes of the Roman Emperor Hadrian and assorted alchemists and searchers of the spirit throughout history. I will tell you what a connection between her and the figure of the Emperor Hadrian. So three great women, the great seekers after Gnosis, both artistic and spiritual, and above all, and this is an important term for all three of them, although maybe more for some than others. Three outsiders. Now, what is an outsider? The term was popularized by the so-called angry young men in the 50s in England, who subsequently became less angry and certainly older, no longer young. That is supposed to be funny also, but in any event. The concept, of course, is age-old. Søren Kierkegaard, the renowned gloomy Dane, the father of existentialism, wrote of the concept of the outsider when referring to himself as early as in 1845. And here is the quotation. I will not take up the time for too many quotations this evening. Just as the top layer in a case of herrings is crushed and spoiled. That's a typical Danish metaphor, you know. And spoiled, and the fruit next to the crate is bruised and worthless. So too in every generation there are certain people who are on the outside and are made to suffer from the packing case, which only protects those who are in the middle. There is a bird called the stormy petrel, and that is what I am, says Kierkegaard of himself. When in a generation storms begin to gather, individuals of my type appear. So that is an example of the way the gloomy Dane defined himself, and by implication also others, as an outsider. Now, outsiders, storm birds, the lonely outposts of distant worlds of consciousness, pilgrims of eternity, crushed by the boundaries of an alien world, a cosmos and a society that protects and protects and comforts only its own. That's how they saw themselves. Such souls have always been in the world, even though more often than not they were not of the world. They have often been called Gnostics, those who know something that others do not, and who are outsiders by virtue of the very secrets they know. The three outsiders under discussion were not only Gnostics of a sort, but they were also women. And that in itself is a predicament of sorts, and perhaps was even a greater predicament when they were young. And although it is not quite the kind imagined by politicized feminism or the worshippers of cliches and facile slogans. So first, let's look a little bit at the outsider. Who is she or he? It has been said by none other than Kierkegaard, whom earlier, but also of someone else who was an unclassifiable philosopher and spiritual teacher, namely Jiddu Krishnamurti, whom I had the privilege of having listened to his lectures, especially in Ojai under the oak trees many times, and I valued them highly. So Krishnamurti said that in all, and he said that and wrote that when he was still very, very young, that in all the world there are only two kinds of people, those who know and those who do not know. So we might say that those who don't know, not having the personal resources of those who know, need protection. Like children being too weak to withstand the perils of life, they need to seek and find what appears to them as security in the structures of society. Now, this is a very Gnostic concept, which of course by the ancient Gnostics was applied, let's say, in a very broad fashion, because they were, let us say, trying to protest not only their presence in a particular society, but their presence in the cosmos. Because cosmos is the Greek word that means system. And there is a certain type of psyche, let us say, that does very badly when confined in a system. And often people of such disposition are far more insightful, far more creative, and ultimately far more transcendental in their outreach than those who don't. So to use the Danish fisherman's metaphor, they move to the middle of the crate. See, not where it touches the cosmos, not where it is pushed around by society and governments and all that sort of thing. They move to the area where those restrictions are not present. Others, fewer in number, remain on the outside and suffer both the agonies and the ecstasies of the outsider. To be sure, not all outsiders are equal in worth. or in realistic potential. Some are outsiders without redeeming merit, misfits, broken on the wheel of the cosmos and of society. Others are martyrs, and like most martyrs, their only true virtue is what? Martyrdom. Being unfit for life or to life, their only gift to consciousness is death. So there are, of course, different forms of martyrdom. So still others are the true knowers, who are outsiders by choice and will, who, like Luther, stand where they stand, for they can do no other. Now, these are the conscious outsiders, who have said no to the world and at the same time said yes to something else, to another world, a world of meaning above meaning and of life beyond life. These are the people who are the true salt and the leaven of the earth. Often they are artists, more seldom philosophers, even more seldom they are clergy of mainstream religiosity, and almost never are they virtuous, wholesome, homespun, ordinary, and presumed happy. So, like the God of the desert, they are that they are. Biblical statement. They are also not only that they are, but they are who and what they are, with no apologies needed, no explanations offered, and with no comfort required. So now, of course, it goes without saying that the real outsiders don't fare terribly well in society just because they are outsiders. They don't fit in. And often this difference that they exhibit from the society wherein they live results in ambivalence toward them, often even in persecution, disapproval, and yet underneath that frequently also of a certain amount of intuitive admiration. Now the next item, they were not only outsiders, but they were women. Are women outsiders by definition? Yes and no. Societal pressures have always existed. And no matter how we shake up the kaleidoscope, which we are doing at the present time, even the kaleidoscope of gender, there will always be such situations. The social pressures of some kind will always be there. Now, we all know the story, but it is not the whole story. Anais, for instance, while still quite young, had a child. The child died at birth. Unlike millions of women, Nin did not take the natural way of feeling sorry for herself, but she wrote of the incident. Here is a little quotation from her. The birth of the real me might have ended like that of my unborn child. And in her book, Winter of Artifice, she writes, evidently paraphrasing on autobiographical motive. The last time she had come out of the ether, it was, by which I think here is meant not the ether above, but the ether as an anesthetic, as maybe some of us who are as old as I, is anyone as old as I, as the song said, will remember as the anesthetic for operations years ago, and a vile thing it was. So the present intravenous anesthetics are really a heck of a lot nicer. If you are looking for a nice anesthetic, which of course is probably another question. So here is a great mystery. I have known, speaking for myself, I have known people who hated Anais' name for these very words, but I certainly never joined the ranks of the haters. For here is the great mystery and the great challenge for all human beings, both men and women. It has to do with the momentous question. In depth psychological terms, which certainly Anais Nin was very familiar with, here is the question, here is the choice. Unconsciousness or consciousness. That's it. Now it can take various disguises. Servitude to nature or discovery of one's own true nature. Living out the unconscious or lifting it into consciousness, into conscious light, even if this does violence to all things that the world calls natural. That's the question. I don't think there is any need to go into a great deal of detail. So, no doubt in most societies that we know of, and our knowledge of the history of the world doesn't really go that far. But let's say there always existed a tendency in societies, from the primitive shamans up to, I don't know, anything but primitive Greeks, to favor in the masculine character an extroverted tendency. So to a natural assumption that men are here to achieve things in the outer world. The reasons for that we don't need to go into. They are very easy to imagine. On the other hand, these roles, even if they were rather undefined, had always those who broke them. So the important thing is that they do not these roles that society attributes to people, they do not contain a conscious light. They are automatic. Anais Nin wrote of this in a feminine context, and she is about the only one whom I'm quoting directly a bit here. Man disposed of woman by identifying her with nature, and then paraded his contemptuous domination of nature. But woman is not nature. She is the mermaid, with her fish tail dipped in the unconscious. So here is a little deep psychological metaphor. Her creation will be to make renounce this obscure world which dominates man, which he delights in being dominated by, but which asserts its domination in defensive proofs of its presence and madness. That's typical Nin. You really have to scratch your head a little bit. I think what she is alluding to here is really quite true. Both men and women are caught by their own projections. Both of these are tragic elements. Being caught by the unconscious because of our one-sidedness. What is the answer? There is no general answer. There is no democratic answer. There is no majority answer. This is only a minority answer, only the answer of the outsider. Because, as has been pointed out, and that doesn't sound terribly democratic or populist, but the masses are asses. And that's why. Dummheit über alles. It is of course true, and no doubt comforting to some people, when Anais Nin says, the drama of woman's development is very painful, for in each case the man seems to, the man seems to punish all growth. Well, no, that's a very feminist statement. The other side is, of course, that society, and often, though inevitably, women are want to punish all growth in men. Also, that's not Anais, no, that's my statement. If this growth, especially if this growth is directed toward the man's spiritually feminine side, the anima side, as Jung would call it, away from extroverted power. So all of this, of course, has to do with the woman as outsider and the man as outsider. Undoubtedly, they face different tasks of the path of the outsider, but both are exceedingly difficult. So no matter from what gender or psychological angle we move toward this thing, the task of the outsider is a difficult one. So now here we have, for our considerations this evening, 3 women, 3 outsiders, the creative and Gnostic rebels. Let us begin with the one, well, since we have already paid some attention to Anais Nin, let's now look at one among them who in many ways was closer to us because she lived longer, namely Marguerite Yourcenar. Mysterious woman, French, and wrote all her works in French. very few being translated into English. Her first published work came out in 1929. It was called Alexis, followed by La Nouvelle Eurydice in 1931, in the year of my birth. Nouvelle Orientale in 1938, Le Coup de Grâce in 1939, Dernier de Rêve in 1934. She wrote a lot in the 30s, in addition to 2 dramatic works, also poems and prose poems and translations into French, mainly from English, such as works of Virginia Woolf, Henry James, and of the great Greek poet Constantine, Alexandrian Greek poet, it's important to mention in this regard, Constantine Cavafy. Only the following of her works have been translated into English. The most famous and probably really the most exciting, Memories of Hadrian. This was published in 1954. Coup de Grâce, 1963. The Abyss, which in French was called L'œuvre noire, the black work, and a coin in 9 hands. Now, Yourcenar, in the few things that I read from her, particularly Memories of Hadrian, really reminded me very greatly of Lawrence Durrell, because she was profoundly influenced by ancient Alexandria and all it stands for. And that is the connection with Constantine Cavafy. Her chief work in this respect, the Memoirs of Hadrian, which are the fictional memoirs of the Emperor Hadrian of Rome. That's an interesting way to put your message into the hands of somebody else and attribute them to somebody else. But she never pretended that her Memoirs of Hadrian were really the writings of the Emperor Hadrian, 2nd century emperor. He was the successor of Trajanus, who ruled over the Roman Empire, within which the Gnostics and the Hermetic Alexandria flourished. So Hadrian was still very, very close to the greatest flourishing of the Alexandrian esoteric tradition. A cultured, aesthetic, refined and perceptive man who with all that still remained a fit soldier and warrior. The last great flowering of imperial Roman culture, and Marguerite Yourcenar picked that as her target. So what we see there is a very beautiful and very reverent statement of the value of classical antiquity. Marguerite Yourcenar referred to it as creative paganism. Also, she extols the pluralism of spiritual traditions, of faiths, in that, at least at that time, in the Roman Empire. And also a pluralism of morals, a pluralism of cultures in what was known as the Pax Romana. There is here are attributed to Hadrian, but of course devised by Marguerite Yourcenar. Here are some observations of Hadrian the Great Traveler. As some of you know, Hadrian went to the British Isles, and I think to this day there are remnants of a wall. Hadrian's Wall. Yeah. So here is an example. When all complicated calculations prove false, when the philosophers themselves have nothing more to tell us, we may be forgiven for turning to the twitter of the birds or the distant counterweight of the stars. That is what Hadrian says in her fictional autobiography. So Yourcenar's works in the main are meditations on the nature and the condition of the human. Hadrian in Imperial Rome has a buffer between himself and the degradation and evil of the world. There is culture, fine books, poetry, mysteries, religions, a sunny world where many flowers of the spirit bloom together. The dark horrors are but ameliorated and minimized. So it reminds me somewhat of the attitude of someone whom I knew when I was very young, and who at that time was a sort of, only for a relatively short time, a sort of guru figure for me. He was a retired general of the Austro-Hungarian army, and he welcomed me to his house. This was when the communists were just about taking over, every Friday evening. And I was there listening to his wisdom. And one of his statements was that war and peace will always be here. And this is from a general, you know. But in order to be able to live in a world wherein war and peace are always present and will always trouble us on various ways, we need to affinitize ourselves to poetry. Poetry is the only thing that defeats the conflict of war and the conflicts of peace, because it lifts us into an area of consciousness which is able to reconcile these. The old gentleman had a very interesting concept of the reconciliation of the opposites, and this was one way in which he expressed it. So Hadrian is the embodiment of this perception. He is a cultured gentleman whose very outlook gently handles the world. But in the long run, of course, in vain. The outsider as ruler and as gentleman. We might define the figure of Hadrian as represented by Yourcenar. In her work, The Abyss, in French published as L'œuvre au noir, the black work, interestingly enough, another thing a little bit in common with some of the others, namely Lawrence Turrell, quite early in life, as maybe some of you may recall from our ruminations on Lawrence Turrell, wrote a book called The Black Book. And hers also, L'œuvre au noir, work in black, the black work. And in it she quite evidently states that what she is writing about is the black stage in alchemy. And it sounds quite a different keynote from Hadrian. It is the bitter struggle of a free mind in dark and troubled times, which brings to our attention that those are the kind of times in which we live now also. But L'œuvre noire is set in this case in the 16th century Europe, which is just barely emerging from the darker side of the Middle Ages. Dogmatism and superstition rule in Catholic, Protestant and sectarian quarters, such as among for instance, the Anabaptists. And there she writes of a figure called Zeno, the alchemist, who is the outsider there, constantly held down and frustrated by society, unable to share the unconsciousness within which people live, unable to share in the fads, in unreasonable loyalties. He spends his life on the road and in the cloister, in shops, taverns, laboratories, and finally ends it in prison. So I would say it's a pretty mobile and pretty peripatetic alchemist. He is the alchemist who explores the very essence of body and sound, and in the process he undergoes the destruction of his psychological ego, of his beliefs, of his standards and values. And this is really the œuvre au noir, the black phase. And she wonderfully put her finger on what would be the Jungian explanation of alchemy. It took Jung about 5 books on alchemy to say the same thing, namely that at a certain point the boundaries, the locked-in quality, the slavery, we might say, of consciousness, as the way consciousness is enslaved with the ego, has to break apart, has to come into a new kind of development. Otherwise, you might say that our life is lost. If we never get beyond the confines of the ego, and in relationship to the ego with some of the unconscious, then we might as well have not lived. So see, what you have to keep in mind here, a little bit the Jungian picture, that there are 2 great processes that take place in our lives. The first one we might call differentiation. The second one we call individuation. But of course you can call them by other names also. So what happens is the little baby comes forth from the body of the mother, and in the same manner the little as yet very unformed psyche comes forth from an unformed mingling of unconsciousness and of various unconscious elements, which some of the Jungian psychologists, and maybe Jung himself, has called the uroboric phase. Now, what is uroboric? The Ouroboros is the tail-swallowing serpent of ancient symbolism, and its application to the human psyche is that of a situation wherein all the potential of future consciousness and of present unconsciousness, all the potential of a human life is in a contained system. It is assumed by Otto Rank, among others, that this is kind of this Ouroboros, this recycling of itself and of its psychic nature is the condition of the unborn embryo. Everything is there in potential and keeps going around, and then comes birth, and with the birth, sort of the early beginning of consciousness. As the baby slips out of the mother's womb, so the nascent consciousness slips out of the Ouroboros. The serpent no longer swallows its own tail, but it comes forth and starts its journey on the path of consciousness. And then now takes place, it's usually assumed to be on sort of around until the age of 4 or thereabouts, give or take a few months, takes place the differentiation. So, and this differentiation leads to the formation of an ego. So the experiences that the child has call upon the resources in the psyche to develop a, how should we call it, a carrier, a guardian, a defender of consciousness. And that is the ego, which is Latin for self. And now this pulls itself away from its unconscious background. And begins, let's say, the journey of life. Because without a decently formed and active ego, the psyche cannot live in the world. It has to come forth and become this kind of self, a self which is capable of handling the world, of dealing with the tasks and the difficulties and the challenges and the responsibilities of living in the world. In alchemy, this is usually symbolized as a square, because the ego has, so Jung tells us, has 4 functions. The ancients referred to them as earth, water, fire, and air. But let's say in contemporary terms, we can refer to them as the function of sensation, of feeling, of thinking, and intuition. And this is when you look at a square and you kind of try to employ a little imagination, you can look at it as a defensive structure, as a kind of maybe a house with 4 walls, or a fenced-in area, a walled-in area with its 4 walls, which undoubtedly serves an important purpose. It protects the consciousness of the ego. And God knows in this world a great deal of protection is usually needed. But then life goes on, and all the various challenges, all the various difficulties, and something happens. And I think that most of us have experienced it at some time or the other maybe are experiencing now. And that is an awareness dawns on us that this fourfold structure of ego is insufficient, that it does not really fulfill our heart's deepest desire, that something is lacking, even though we have developed various abilities and unfolded various talents whereby to handle the world, but something is missing. And then how can this missing element be discovered? How can we break out of that fourfold world, that fence, and come to something greater? How can transformation take place? That is, of course, a great and portentous question. Now, according to Jung's interpretation, which I think is very, very valuable, this is the beginning of alchemy. And let's say, according to Marguerite Yourcenar in her black book, this is the coming of the black phase. The structures of the ego weaken. It begins to admit other influences. In fact, you might say when the process of transformation, which also is called individuation, now begins, see, up to that point, and that's, again, you can't chronologically fixate these things, but let's say midlife, and this is the real midlife crisis. You know, how am I going to break out from the boundaries, not only of society, not only of external circumstances, but the boundaries of my own terrestrial ego? And the only way that can be undertaken is that there is now a new process which comes in. And it can be called, Jung called it individuation, but it is now the process of the ego transforming into something else. So there is, and this is the great question. So about midlife, but again, we can't fixate these things in terms of time. There comes a sort of an unuttered and yet very portentous question. Are you going to change in a creative way? Are you going to come and go away from the limitations of the ego and of the world of the ego? There is another task to be done. Just to be born into this world and then learning how to function within it with our ego is, at best half of the task. There is another task. And that other task is to become a new being. A being, the chief characteristic of which is what? Is that it is indivisible. It cannot be further broken up, but it is transforming. And for this reason it has been called individuation, because the indivisible entity, in German ein Individuum, that really comes from the Latin, that which is indivisible, now comes into being. And so Marguerite Yourcenar, with a good knowledge of alchemy, just moves into this process and indicates on the basis of a novelistic treatment as to how the black phase comes about and how one needs to be able to function within that and to come out as an indivisible unity, as a human philosopher's stone, as the old alchemists were wont to say, be therefore living philosopher's stone. So what we have here, and what certainly Yourcenar caught on to with her interest in alchemy, is that to become an ego being, a person in society, somebody with a work, a profession, somebody perhaps with a family, somebody with having a certain position in an aspect of society, which this is regarded as the goal of people in societies and of humanities. And the more they kick against it at times, the more they are caught with it. It's a little bit like, I don't know what stupid metaphor to use, but it is somewhat like maybe you may have fallen into a big ball of wax or a big ball of clay or something of that sort, and you try to push your way through it eventually if you can, otherwise you are captured by it. So we come into this world and we apparently want to be there, although there is sometimes question about that. I didn't want to, I think. But I had to finally settle for it, and I remained here for quite a long time so far. But I really didn't like it. I really thought, it's not this damn place again, that sort of thing. I did not know those words. But in any event, that is the issue of transformation. Are you willing to see that ego and all that is attached to is loosen up and really change into something else? And so it's really that process that in her œuvre noire, the œuvre au noir, and the work in the dark, in the black, that she speaks of. This is the œuvre de noir. Zeno the alchemist obtains victory psychologically, spiritually, but he dies physically in person as a heretic. Is thrown into jail. There's a sort of little reference there to Cathars and other Gnostic pests. This is the hero of transformation as an outsider. So what is really implied here, that to be an alchemist in our own lives, we have to be an outsider. Or at least, let's say, we have to develop within ourselves the characteristics of the outsider. I'll just throw in a little thought in connection with that, and I do very deeply believe in that, and that is very contemporary, that we cannot allow ourselves, not our egos either, but certainly not our selfhood, to become immersed in collectivities. When we become just a member of a group, then I think we have fallen into hell. Because that is the very opposite of what our spiritual nature wants us to do. Individuum, the indivisible unity, the self that is not like anybody else's self. It has no race, it has no class, it has no allegiance to a particular societal or related structure. It is the growing philosopher's stone. And when there are powerful pressures preventing that, or trying to prevent that, then there is a great big struggle. And if we look at history, I don't think there was ever a time in any society where there were not powerful pressures in that regard. Because the collective is always trying to swallow up the individual. And the individual is there kicking and screaming and trying to get away from that collectivity. And really the only way to deal with that is to persist in the process of transformation, recognizing that in the process of transformation, individuation, whatever you wish to call it, we are on the road of becoming our authentic selves. Our authentic self is not a little machinery in a society, neither is it a part of a group, not of a race, not of any collectivity, but is itself. And it is that self which Jung always wrote with a capital S, and which he construed as the central archetype of our being. That self is the result of alchemy, that is the philosopher's stone. But no matter whether we live in the Middle Ages, when the alchemists were there, or I don't know, in ancient Egypt, or in the 18th century with the Enlightenment, or now, we are always under pressures to somehow cover up that self and to listen to the enticements and the pressures of external forces, and to resist that. That is really part of the great alchemical task. So now just a little remnant. I think Yourcenar says in so many words that spiritual victory often involves a worldly defeat. You can't do both at the same time. So when you are breaking out of the confinements of the ego and thereby of society, there are defeats there. So the hero of transformation, we would say, as the outsider. And that you really have to cultivate that quality of you as the outsider in order to be transformed. So what kind of evaluation can we give to Marguerite Yourcenar? She was the outsider in life. Hadrian, who is sort of her masculine Roman projection, Hadrian the statesman, Zeno the dying alchemist, also the protagonists of her other book, A Coin in Nine Hands, who try, which is a modern theme. The coin in nine hands is in contemporary World War before World War II, around World War II, Italy, and there you have somebody who is trying to assassinate Mussolini, and obviously doesn't succeed. So a would-be hero, and a hero whom the world in that time does not recognize, but heroes of consciousness who know evil and nobly live in an ignoble world. And this appears in all through Marguerite Yourcenar's writings. Now, since we have started with her, we'll jump once again to Anais Nin. She is constant, she is certainly the example of the outsider, as artist. As I mentioned before, born in 1903, she lived through 2 world wars and then experienced the 2 great liberating periods of Western culture in this century, the 1920s and the 1930s being the first one, and the 1960s and the 70s being the second one. Great upheavals of the collective psyche, which appeared to be an exciting, liberating period, at least at the time. Anais Nin was the daughter of a haughty, aristocratic Spanish artist, and the mother who was none of these. Until the age of 11, she lived in Europe, mostly in France, and then in her early 20s she returned to Europe where she remained for a long time, and where one might say her heart remained in some ways forever. Her temperament, her life, and her mind are that of an artist. In her early youth, she was an artist's model, a cafe dancer, and subsequently a writer. Pretty nice, varied career, wouldn't you say? Her writings were esoteric, artistic, published in small, sometimes private editions and printings. Only her diaries, originally written as an obsessive hobby. She said that if something happened and that took up all her day and all her night, and she couldn't, if a day passed where she couldn't write her diaries, she felt that she was going to go crazy. So somehow her diaries were demanding expression. I must say she's very different in that respect from myself, who have been pressured and cajoled and enticed and seduced to write my memoirs, and it took me years and years and years and years, and they're still not finished. I always find an excuse to do something else, but not Anais Nin. Let's see a little further. So she published her first book in 1932, which attracted an attention of a small but select group of fellow artists, critics, and men and women of letters. She was in her 20s, and the book was a study, I think we mentioned it earlier. It was a study of D.H. Lawrence, entitled appropriately D.H. Lawrence, an unprofessional study. She then wrote a number of remarkable novels and stories which had their own select circle of readers, a sort of special public, as it were. These include Children of the Albatross, House of Incest, Under a Glass Bell, The Hunger, The Four-Chambered Heart, A Spy in the House of Love, Seduction of the Minotaur, and The Winter of Artifice. So quite a few nice little titles. These were crowned by the 6 or 7 volumes, I can't remember, of her diaries, which she began publishing in 1965. She was a close friend and girlfriend of Henry Miller, and a friend and confidant of some of the most creative artists of 2 continents, including Lawrence Durrell, Antonin Artaud, and many, many others. She won critical acclaim from such outstanding critics as Edmund Wilson. It was difficult to get a good word out of that old sourpuss, so I understand, and Rebecca West. One of her great interests from an early part of her life on was, as I mentioned before, depth psychology, and she was closely associated with numerous psychoanalysts and psychologists, and as I mentioned before, Otto Rank. The heterodox disciple of Freud, and a man profoundly interested in the psychology of the artist. Because, you know, the attitude toward artists of depth psychologists varied very greatly. In the days when I had to study Freud and all the Freudians, I found that Freud himself and quite a few of his close disciples, they just about were on the verge of saying that the artist is a neurotic. And that art is an expression of neurosis. At the same time, they all had very artistic friends and things like that. For instance, Lou Andreas Salome, who was a sort of the, how should I put it, the great, awesome woman of the early psychoanalysts, you know, was somebody whom Freud admired tremendously. He was the only person whom he never wrote to her by addressing her in any other way but meine liebste Lou, my dearest Lou. And yet, you know, and Freud felt really more at home among sort of the Viennese artistic people than anybody else. But he still held that they were sick. You know, because if they were not sick, then they would adjust to society and work and raise children and make money. I mean, I'm obviously distorting his views a little bit, but that's what it really amounted to. So one of the great interests therefore of Anais Nin was depth psychology, and I never met Anais Nin. I did meet her husband, her last husband, let's put it that way. And the reason for that was because I wanted to, and I succeeded in persuading him to get my book, the Gnostic Jung, to Lawrence Durrell, because they were all friendly. And I knew that they were, Anais and her husband, that they were in touch with Lawrence Durrell, and he did, which was a great satisfaction to me. Lawrence Durrell even wrote me quite a nice letter thanking me for it. But let's say Anais Nin obviously didn't buy into the Freudian proposition that all artists were neurotics, but from France, she moved to America during World War II, and then lived the last part of her life, as I mentioned, in Los Angeles, in the Silver Lake district, and she was catapulted to new fame by her diaries. Now, Nin herself defined her goal in most of her life as having been intimate with people, with experience and with life itself. So this indicates a striving for relating to what you are involved with, who you are involved with, in great depth and in great energy. Dream and reality were the two great polarities within which she operated and which she tried to reconcile. She was very interested in dreams. Dreams have provided her with a vision and an ideal which few persons could even verbalize, less than accomplish. She could look upon life as a function wherein the ideals of the dream could be realized. And some of these I will, time is going away with us. Some of the, about 4 important points that are emphasized in that regard in her works are: number 1, total personal liberty. Now, you know, that's a difficult thing to accomplish, but it's definitely something to strive for. And I think that it is very, if indeed I am right in this pessimistic assessment, it is a terrible calamity that the regard for, the striving for, even the reverence for great or total personal liberty that has characterized the foundation and so much of the history of the United States has now fallen into ill repute. That's very, very unfortunate. In our souls we are free. If we can be in the dream, Anais wrote, then we also can do it in real life. Now then, the second, creative self-expression. Everybody should find ways of creatively expressing himself, which again is only possible if there is great and perhaps total personal liberty. And also to consider the possibility that many, if not all, of the hostile and destructive impulses in humanity can be removed by an increase of self-awareness. This is really the message of individuation. And for the fourth, that productive actions of the individual can be increased by the transformation of unconscious energies being brought to consciousness. Let's say this gives us quite a bit of material about Anais Nin, and I was, with her regard for her extolling the importance of the dream, as she called it, she reminded me of great poetic predecessors, among them the great Spanish poet Calderon, who wrote that amazing symbolic play La Vida el Sueño, Life the Dream, which theme was actually picked up much later by the Austrian playwright Grillparzer in a work called the Traum ein Leben. He turned it around. The dream is a life is a dream. The dream is life, which is a wonderful play. I shouldn't drag out the situation, but let's say just think of the idea. It's such a wonderful idea. There's a magician named Rustan in Grillparzer's play. And somebody comes to Rustan and he basically wants the meaning of life. And so Rustan takes him to a bowl of water, which is really the divining modality, let us say, ever since ancient Egypt, you know. And but he doesn't make him just look into the water. He pushes his head into the water. And in these few minutes that the gentleman's face is under the water, he lives an entire life. And then he talks about it. This is the life that I saw. And so that there is a source of inspiration, there is a source of creativity, another world that about the only time that we really touch it often, and even that probably requires certain talent, is the dream. At least such was Anais Nin's position. Now, how could such a person with such principles and with the ability and the willingness to put those principles in action be anything but an outsider? And so that's why we can characterize Anais Nin as the outsider, as the artist. Now, the next outsider is the outsider as mystic and Gnostic, which of course is very precious to some of us. And her name is, or rather was, Simone Weil, which actually was pronounced Weil in French, which means waiting or keeping vigil, not vieille, which means old. She was born as an outsider and she died as one. Born February the 3rd, 1909 in Paris. The parents were German Jewish, but not religious. She was brilliant and had also a brilliant brother, André Weil, who became a highly accomplished physicist. By 1931, she was an instructor in philosophy at a school in France. She came from an upper middle class family. Her father was a doctor. She went through a certain development in her life, let us say. Initially, she was very anti-establishment. She loathed what she called the great beast. Collectivities, big movements, the state, the rigidity and exclusiveness, among others, of the faith of her people in Israel. She was very much of the left in her early years, but she never joined the Communist Party unless, unlike Jean-Paul Sartre and various other goofy people, not even for a day. She went to Spain to fight, as various others did, what was it, the Lincoln Brigade or something, with a lot of American intellectuals. But this is interesting to note, she went to Spain during the Spanish Civil War. But who she joined in Spain? She joined the anarchists. The anarchists had their own army. I wonder how whether they had any officers whom they had to obey or not. They had black flags, and they were one of the, they were the anarchists, they were the Carlists, they were the nationalists, and there were, of course, the communists. But she joined the anarchists in Spain. In Catalonia. She was sent home because of being wounded, believe it or not by a weapon, but by hot cooking oil. She got badly burned and she was sent back to France. After seeing the futility of political solutions, such as the Spanish Civil War, she moved to religious and spiritual interests. Now, I'm sure that I'm way over with the time, but let's say during the German occupation, she managed to flee to America. And while she was here, she was already a scholar and had written something. And while she was here, she received a letter. And the letter was from a man named Charles de Gaulle. And Le Grand Charles said, "You are a treasure of France. You come back to my headquarters in England. I want you as one of my assistants." And she got on a boat amidst all the U-boats and everything, and she sailed to England and became a resource for General de Gaulle. And that is often not known. Now, however, let's say all the various works that she wrote, here are a few. Thoughts without order concerning the love of God. Isn't that a nice title? Letters to a priest. Oppression and liberty. Intimations of Christianity among the ancient Greeks. Notebooks of Simone Weil. And as I read some of them, I couldn't help it but see that he was a natural-born Gnostic, and she read such Gnostic literature as was available at that time, too. At the same time, she was also very attracted to the Catholic Church, but like some of us, she was attracted to its mysteries, to its sacraments, and not to its doctrines. There is absolutely no doubt in the mind of anyone who has some concept of Gnostic spirituality that she was a natural-born Gnostic, and that she expressed that also most powerfully in many of her books. But let's see, as all Gnostics, she was also weird, and for instance, and this, let's say, some of her weirdness, God bless her, resulted in her death, because, of course, Hitler was running the show in most of Europe, even in France, and concentration camps and all of that were going great, and she conceived an idea that she wanted to live on exactly the same diet that people in the worst concentration camps did. And she did, and she died. So she essentially starved herself to death as an act of solidarity with the inmates of the concentration camps. For this, I think Charles de Gaulle himself called her a martyr. and she was. So I would say that if she had been a Catholic and she hung around with priests and wrote letters to priests, and she was very, very friendly with a lot of people in the Catholic Church. But if she had been in the Catholic Church, I think she would have been canonized as a saint, because she was a saint. But she was a Gnostic saint. Her take on religion and on Christianity was a solely Gnostic one, and when you read her material, it's all there, beginning with the idea of coming from a distant reality into a bad unreality in the world, of the lower world being run by lowly archon spirits, just about everything else. Glimpses of Sophia and relations to Sophia with Mary. It's full of Gnostic materials, and certainly one of the most admirable, the most amazing, and the most saintly Gnostic souls in modern times. And almost anything that you find by her, whether they are short essays or poetry or things like that, are of an utterly mystical nature that are just capable of transporting you into something very, very profound and very, very deep. So now we have come to the end of the line. So we need to keep in mind that the how should I put this? That the ability of the human soul, the human psyche, as Jung would call it, to be able to make contact with a transcendental reality and to derive insight and wisdom. And not only those, but let's say a real, like it would be the case very much with Anais, a real zest for life, a real jeu de vivre, a real joy of life from inside the psyche, and that makes for the outsider, the one who is pushed to the side in society and things like that, but who strives for that which is beyond, and that to truly successfully and often joyously live in this world, you have to have contact with another. That the purpose of earthly life is not in the external circumstances of the world or in achieving various objectives there, but is in the unfathomable depths in which our psyche is rooted, and which truly supply the meaning and the strength and the understanding of life and of ourselves. And that when in that fashion, by becoming that indivisible unity of spirit and psyche, then life is fulfilled. And these people strove for that. And that indeed there is a great deal of motivational power in art, especially the poetic, the dramatic and the spiritually powerful art which all of these outstanding people of the 20th century manifested, and that we should respect that and address ourselves to it and strive for it and see where we can discover some people and their activities that are similar to that in the present world, because assuredly it is only from people like this that any kind of a hope of regeneration, a hope of rebirth, a hope of a re-strengthening of the soul of our culture may come, if it is going to come from anywhere. It will not come from any other source. So I think we need to pay attention to the outsider, to the mystic, to the artist, to those kin of the Emperor Hadrian who walk among us, and maybe by rediscovering people like that, we might help our downtrodden, of our miserable and our enfeebled and unintelligent world to recover itself and to become what it was intended to do. So I hope that our little series here has been of interest to you, including our three ladies tonight. And keep in mind now how our schedule will be, and within a couple of weeks' time or so, I hope to see you again. And I thank you so much for having come now and on the previous occasions, and thank you very much.